Good morning. We're glad you could join us this morning for Bible study. We're pleased today to have Pastor Scott with us. And for those of you who may not have been viewing last week, Pastor Scott is new with us, starting his second week, and so we're glad that he is here with us. To my left is Carolyn Eselgroth, and then to her left is Tom Counts. Partners in marriage and family, and also, as is always the case, Abby is here too. Hi, Abby, and she is present with us. So I wanted to mention, though, last week, the Bible study that we did last week went as far as Bratislava, Slovakia. Oh my goodness. And so, John, if you're out there, John, if you get a copy of this, we're glad that you can view the Bible study, but this is in your honor, because you did mention that, you know, we are a Bible study and we all typically have coffee and goodies. We don't have the goodies here, but we've got the coffee. So, John, in your honor as well. We miss all of you on our Wednesday morning Bible studies, and we are also very pleased with those of you who are starting to look at these and are asking for us to continue these even after this crisis is abated. So we will certainly do what we can. We are reading from the New Revised Standard Version, the NRSV. So if you have that version available to you and you want to follow along, that would be great. Each of us will read a section. We're reading John 11, 1 through 45. Once we get the reading done, and we'll just open it up, particularly to Carolyn and Tom, to ask any questions that they might have, and then Pastor Scott and I have some interesting things that we'd like to fill in along the way as well. So we will start reading. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them. After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him."
When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world."
When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?"
Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you would always hear me. But I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him.
Thank you. So, were there any questions that popped up along the way as we were reading, or any insights that you want to mention?
There's a lot here.
There's a lot here.
It's a long
yes,
verse.
It is. It's a very long text,
Well,
and it is very
full.
rich.
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of focuses that we could hone in on.
Yes.
Something I like to ask a lot of times is, what did you notice? What did you wonder?
Well, the one thing that I noticed, and it was really in context of last Sunday's gospel, is in both instances, it talks about illness as being a thing that serves God's purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that disturbs me, especially in this time. You know,
Yeah.
it's hard to understand that.
Right.
Because Jesus clearly is saying here that the reason Lazarus died is so that this could give glory to God.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, that is difficult for us
The
to
purposeful-
believe and understand. Yeah.
The purposeful waiting 4 days.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes. You know, I read a commentator just this morning, and it said, sort of underlying in the midst of this is our relationship, and not just our relationship with Jesus, but the relationship that Mary and Martha and Lazarus had.
Yes.
And it says that Jesus loved him, and he loved Mary and Martha.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing is, it doesn't say that very often, using the word for a closer, more intimate love for them. And so here's Mary and Martha, and even though they have this relationship with Jesus, that they may expect special treatment because of it. What's happening here is it's not that he's not treating them in a special way, but that it is that underlying this is, even with our relationship with God, not everything turns out the way we expect it to, or that we want it to. But the thing is that in God's own timing, God shows up. Right. So the relationship is there. It's never severed, ever. Jesus didn't sever the relationship, but it is in God's good timing that Jesus showed up. And so I think that's something that we have to take away from this, recognizing that, yes, we're in a relationship with God, but that doesn't prevent bad things from happening.
Disturbs him.
It still disturbs him. Absolutely.
He's greatly disturbed.
Absolutely.
He's weeping.
Yeah.
But why would you be disturbed when you've said before
exactly.
that he's going to rise again?
Yeah.
I thought that too, Tom.
Yeah.
I want to ask, do you all hear this passage differently in light of the global coronavirus pandemic? This passage about death and illness, do we hear it differently? Are we like more maybe acutely sensitive to it? Does it rub us the wrong way?
For me, as I read through it, it did at the very beginning. And then I hadn't really ever focused on this. You know, at the end, Jesus looks upward and says, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me. And to me, that was something new that we've got to continue on praying, because God does hear us in the midst of everything that's happening right now.
Right, right.
And of course he looks at death and illness differently than we do, and we don't understand that.
Right. And we don't understand too, and especially here with coronavirus, is why do some people live and others don't?
Right.
And you know, we can explain it away, but it still raises that question for us, you know, of where is God in the midst of this?
Right.
But the piece of it is that God is always there, as you said, always listening, and a part of our obedience is to always come to God in prayer and lift these things up, especially when we have no control over them, especially when.
I made a note about something about the finiteness of the world. Let me see if I can find that. I'm not going to find it.
Yeah. Well, I want to add this. What I think is, I don't know if you noticed this, excuse me, as well, but John particularly shows us Mary as being the Mary that knelt at Jesus' feet. So in verse 2, it says, Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. And we know we have this struggle in one sense. In Luke, we have the struggle with Mary and Martha and siblings and sisters especially, as who's doing more work and who's not doing work, okay? So we kind of have that in our mind as well. Yeah. But John points out here that Mary was the one who intimately washed his feet and put perfume on them. And then if you go back later, where she goes out to meet him, verse 32, when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him. So for me, that means that even in the midst of things that we don't understand, it is about our worship, and that we come before God humbled. And Mary was grieving, and yet in her grief, she realized that Jesus was the one who would give her hope. Not knowing at that time how it would all play out, but she knew, and she trusted that Jesus was the one.
Well, they had to know what trouble he was in.
Yes.
And how dangerous it was for him to show up.
And this is the turning point here. So after this happens, and it says here that some of them believed, but others were not, you know, they were angry with what was going on. This turning point is where they will go now, and they will tell the leaders, and the leaders will say, it's time for us to put him to death. Now, I just want to add something interesting, that I never really, I don't know if I never caught it or never realized it, but life becomes dangerous for Lazarus as well.
Yes,
so I want to
yes.
read, so for all of us, I want to read in John. This is farther along in John, and it is John 12, and it's verses 10 through 11. So let me find it here. Actually, I'm going to read 9 through 11. When the great crowd of the Jews learned that he was there, they came not only because of Jesus, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests planned to put Lazarus to death as well, since it was on account of him that many of the Jews were deserting and were believing in Jesus. So here's Lazarus now. I mean, poor guy. All he did was die. He didn't ask to be brought back to life. He's brought back to life, and now his life is put in danger because of it. And so how that must play out, too, in how Lazarus lives his life now and lives out his faith.
Well, and Mary and Martha with him, yeah.
How they live out
Bonnie,
their faith.
it's interesting that you mentioned that this leads up and sort of starts that process where Jesus ends up on the cross. And I was wondering whether his weeping was not
for himself.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the weeping maybe for himself, I think he's also weeping for the people who don't get it.
Yeah.
Because there are those there among him. I don't know that he's weeping so much for Lazarus because he understands Lazarus's faith, but for the ones who do not believe and will not, and quite honestly, who will refuse to believe. I think that's who he's weeping for. Absolutely. This is sort of that foretaste of the feast to come, that weeping for those who won't come to believe.
Bonnie, I'd like to take a step back to the point you made about Mary and also Martha both asked the same thing.
Yeah.
If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But yet they both kind of follow that up with kind of a saying of hope. But yet I know,
And in their individual ways.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
I almost sense Martha is saying it more matter of fact. If you had been here,
Yes.
you'd be alive. And Mary, I think, comes from a different spirituality and a different, the more empathetic feeling place. If you had just been here.
So I think it gives us permission to ask God why, or to lament, or to poke a little bit and say, this isn't right, this isn't fair, but ultimately to not live into that despair. So you see both a questioning and a faith from both sisters, and I thought that stood out to me.
Yeah.
Well, and I thought it takes great patience that only Jesus has when you hear that. If you had been here, how many times have we been said, if you had done this, I wouldn't be in this mess.
That's right.
Exactly. Because just as soon as you hear that, your whole disposition changes and you get defensive.
Yes.
You know?
Patience runs very thin.
And I tried to read this in with different inflection to give that empathy or that, and I couldn't do it.
Yeah. We still see that accusatory tone sometimes, even when we try. And maybe not everybody sees that, but if it's happened to us, we feel that accusing.
Right.
If you'd have been here, if you'd have done this, if you just would have, I wouldn't be where I am right now.
Especially with Jesus knowing he waited 2 days.
Yes.
You know,
and then he walked 2 more.
Intentionally.
A commentary that I read today talked about Jesus did not do the easy thing. The easy thing would have been prevented death from occurring to begin with. He waited 4 days, and this commentary kind of said it was to bring healing out of death, to do that impossible thing that no one, even Mary and Martha, no one believed that was going to happen. Take away the stone. I still don't think they believed.
Right.
Well, there's Martha, very practical.
Right. It's been 4 days.
Yeah.
I saw a sermon title one time, Who Stinketh? About Lazarus. So, that was their concern. Yeah.
And I think that that's part of what God does. God does not prevent pandemics. God does not prevent death. God, I think...
Nor does he give it.
He doesn't give it, and he...
But he doesn't prevent it.
And he doesn't always take it away or take it back. I don't know why, but I think God kind of operates by bringing beauty out of pain, by bringing life out of death, healing out of suffering. That isn't easy to comprehend, and we don't know why. But how many times have we seen good come out of evil, good come out of bad? I think that's what God does, but who knows
and while
why.
we're in the midst of it, we don't always see the good that's coming out.
No.
But I mean, and certainly that's from Romans 8. For everyone who believes, there's good that can come out of these kinds of situations, right?
Yeah.
But often we have to, after we're through it,
Yeah.
realize
Well,
what
it's
the good
attitude
is.
adjustment.
Yes.
And
yes.
if there's anything that I hope for in the midst of this is that we get an attitude adjustment, that after this pandemic is over with, that people will be kinder to each other, that people will be in greater community with each other, regardless of the fact that they've been out of community for weeks, you know.
Yeah.
It almost seems as if we are community in the midst of this, rather than just a bunch of individuals thrown together in a pot. I mean, prior to this, it had felt we get in our car, we go to where we need to be, we do what we need to do, where, you know, it's all about we or my immediate. And now I think we're doing a broader sweep and really looking at community and how is it that we can help out in a bigger way. So I do too. I hope that's a result of this.
We have more in
Absolutely.
common than we know.
Yes. Yes.
After 9/11, I think, you know, we saw like changes that have become permanent have been an awareness of safety, an awareness of if someone would leave a book bag or a bag alone. That was kind of a both good and bad effect that kind of has carried through the following decades of where really security has been increased globally. I'm hoping out of this pandemic that ongoing effect will be something good, like you said, Tom, about being kinder and being in community more intentionally. I'm hoping that will be something that we don't, we feel that for a few months and then we go back to being self-centered.
Right.
I hope that that can stick with us and that we can so value being together.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that we've learned is that the world is so small. You know, I don't know whether travel has been the cause of this, but at least I have that feeling. And we now know the world is really small. This is the first time that you would have something like this engulf the entire globe. And so suddenly we're a community with everybody in this world.
You're right.
And you know, that draws my attention to this. So here's what I want to say. So going off of what you two are talking about, it says, Lazarus come out, the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. I wonder how much of this pandemic is an unbinding of us. We're bound to self, we're bound to sin, we're bound to really our selfishness. Maybe this is a chance that we are actually coming out of our own tombs that bind us, and the cloths are coming off, and we can be the people that God wants us to be, maybe in a different and a better way.
And who knows when it's all over and we open our windows, what stench is going to come out.
Well played. Well played.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Who stinketh? All right. Well, I think that this is a good time for us to and any last thoughts or comments that we
can't
have?
leave out Thomas.
Oh, yes. Yes. Thomas, who doubted, I mean, poor Thomas, who has always been called a doubter, now is the one who says, let's go with Jesus.
He's a fatalist, too.
He's a fatalist, too. That's right. Let's go with him, and we'll just die with him. That's absolutely right. So, very good. Thank you for being with us this morning. We are just pleased that you could be here. Again, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments section We will, on Thursday, do a tape then to answer your questions or share the comments that you have as well. We are so happy that we are able to do this. Again, Pastor Scott and I, Pastor Bonnie, Carolyn Eselgroth, Tom Counts, and again, Abby Counts is behind the camera. We are blessed that she is here and doing this with and for us. May God's blessings continue to shine down on you. And I'm going to ask Pastor Scott this week if he would close us with a prayer.
Absolutely. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Loving God, you come to us separately, and you bring us together through YouTube and Facebook and all of the ways that you work to keep us in community. While we do pray for an end to this global pandemic, we also look for your beauty and healing in the midst of it. May you continue to love us, to give us healing and health as we continue to try to maintain social distance. Bring us back together as quickly as possible. Amen.
Thank you, and we hope to see you soon.